It is definitely my privilege to introduce Dr. Sanjiv Chopra. He doesn't really need any introduction. He's a clinical professor of medicine and faculty for the Dean of Continuing Medical Education at Harvard Medical School. He's also a senior consult in hepatology at Beth Israel Deaconess here. Numerous publications, books, and awards, far too many to mention, but I will just point out his most recent book, Leadership by Example, The 10 Key Principles to All Great Leaders, which I think will tie in very nicely to his talk. Dr. Sanjiv Chopra.
So I'm really delighted to be speaking on the topic of leadership. It's something that I've reflected upon for a long, long time. And if I ask you to conjure up images of great leaders, great leadership moments from the pages of history or from historical times, contemporary times, who comes to mind? What stories resonate with you? You hear the word leader, leadership moment. Gandhi, Nelson Mandela. So Winston Churchill.
Dr. Chopra, real quick, just where he is.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Abraham Lincoln. So I've had the privilege of giving this talk more than 100 times in the States and 20 times abroad. And every time I start like this, and this is exactly the answer I get. So what we tend to do is we think of historical and political figures. And I'd like to make the point that ordinary people can lead in extraordinary ways. All of you are leaders. I'm going to share with you some stories and some tenets about leadership. I've taught medicine for many years and often used alliterations, metaphors, and mnemonics. So I'm going to start by saying that all great leaders, by their passion, their sense of purpose, and their accomplishments, live a great story. And then those stories are told by their followers, they're told by historians, they resonate in all the lands, and they do so for decades and decades. So you don't have to be from South Africa to say Nelson Mandela, what an awe-inspiring leader. You don't have to be British to say Sir Winston Churchill. You don't have to be from India to say, I'm in awe of Mahatma Gandhi. So here's my leadership mnemonic, and as you can see, it spells out leadership. So I'm going to make the point that great leaders listen. They listen with heart and soul. They have empathy and compassion. They have an attitude that is upbeat and courageous. They dare to dream big. They're effective. They're resilient. They have a sense of purpose. They have humility. They also often have great humor. They have integrity. They have wild ideas. They have great imagination. And they pack other people's parachutes. And I'm going to tell you a story about Captain Charlie Plum, whom I've had the privilege of meeting, and a wonderful story about packing other people's parachutes. There's a wonderful anonymous quote, although I heard recently abroad that this is actually a Kurdish proverb. It says, listen 100 times, ponder 1,000 times, speak once. Oliver Wendell Holmes once said, it is in the province of knowledge to speak. It is in the privilege of wisdom to listen. Abraham Lincoln once said, it is better to be silent and be thought a fool than to speak up and dispel all doubt. Now, one of the things we need to do as physicians is listen to our patients. Right? We interrupt them all the time. We're taking a history, we're formulating a differential diagnosis, we're trying to cut to the chase, but we really need to listen to them. Mark Peppercorn, who used to be Adam's mentor and great colleague of ours, I used to call him Pepper Crone, one of the world's experts in inflammatory bowel disease. 30 years ago, he said to me, Sanjiv, when I go for rounds, I pull up a chair and I sit down. I can spend 2 minutes with the patient and they think I've given them all the time. But if you stand at the foot end of the bed and you talk to them and you spend 20 minutes, they think you've given them not enough time. You're going to click on your heels and walk away. Very simple thing. Pull up a chair and sit down. Talk to them. As you're leaving, say, do you have any questions of me? And often the answer is no. Of course, the moment you step outside, they say, oh, I should have asked him that. Give them a 3x5 card. Say, write down, I'll be back later this evening or tomorrow and we'll talk about it. Or when your family comes, they may have a question. Write it down and we'll talk about it. Very simple. Just listen to our patients. So the second attribute is that great leaders have empathy and compassion. We were very fortunate to have His Holiness the Dalai Lama as a keynote speaker at a Harvard Medical School CME course. And he once said, "Be kind whenever possible. It is always possible." He also once said, "If you want others to be happy, practice compassion. If you want to be happy, practice compassion." In the Talmud it says, compassion is the highest form of wisdom. And that's something we need to be very, very attuned to, right? Being compassionate with our patients. It doesn't matter whether they're CEOs of companies or skid row derelicts or people with multi-drug resistant TB. We have to have the same compassion for all of our patients. Many of you have heard of Paul Farmer, right? How many of you have heard of Dr. Paul Farmer? So a lot of you. So he's a colleague. He's a professor, infectious disease, medical anthropologist, now named a university professor, very few university professors at Harvard. And together with Jim Kim, his colleague, they have provided the most seminal care for the poorest of the poor, the destitute, different parts of the world, Haiti, Rwanda, Peru, Russian prisons, multi-drug resistant TB. Jim Kim once said, "You know, Paul and I are brothers. We fight all the time. The only difference is we happen to have different mothers." And Jim Kim, at a young age, became the president of Dartmouth. Then he was tapped by President Obama to lead the World Bank. One time, the two of them were applying for a Bill and Melinda Gates grant. And Jim Kim walks over to Paul and he says, "How much are we asking for?" And Paul said, "We're asking for about 4.8 million. He said, "No, that's not enough. I've developed a different plan. It's much more robust." So Paul turned to him and said, "What are we asking for?" He said, 24.32 million. They applied, they got the grant. It's an amazing story. Now, Paul Farmer once said, "The idea that some lives matter less is the root of all that's wrong with this world." What a simple and profound statement. His favorite billboard is one he encountered in Haiti some 20 years ago. And it says, "The only true nation is humanity." So Paul Farmer got the MacArthur Genius Award, and he plowed all $450,000 into his foundation. This is a patient with end-stage AIDS. He's literally on his deathbed. And some years ago, Paul Farmer goes together with Jim Kim. They go to the pharmacy at the Brigham and Women's Hospital with an empty suitcase. And they sweet talk their way into the pharmacist giving them $93,000 worth of antiretrovirals. They fly to Haiti, they administer it to this man, and this is the same individual who's now fully recovered and has this beautiful baby. The story of Paul Farmer's work is told in a wonderful book by Tracy Kidder. Tracy Kidder is a 3 times Pulitzer Prize winner, and it's called Mountains Beyond Mountains, the quest of Dr. Paul Farmer, a man who would cure the world. The third attribute of great leaders is that they have an attitude that's always upbeat and courageous. This is a story of a huge building coming up in Texas, and there's a newspaper reporter and a photographer. They're going to write a story about this building. They see a laborer with a wheelbarrow full of bricks, and they turn to him and said, "Sir, what kind of work do you do?" And the guy's irked. He says, "Can't you see I'm carrying bricks on this hot and muggy day?" And a few minutes later, there's another laborer, similar wheelbarrow full of bricks. He's smiling, he's whistling. He nods to the newspaper reporter, who in turn says, "So what kind of work do you do?" And the guy answered, "I'm helping build the most beautiful cathedral in the world." This is a story of a janitor at NASA who was asked the question, "What kind of work do you do?" He said, "I'm part of the team that puts the astronauts into space." So your attitude is even more important than your aptitude. And it's very important to always be upbeat and to be courageous. Sir Winston Churchill once said, "Courage is rightly esteemed the first of human qualities, because it is the quality that guarantees all others. So great leaders lead with both heart and soul. Countries without great leaders, leaders without soul, will not only be economically and ecologically disadvantaged, they'll also be spiritually bankrupt. And they will emerge free from the morass and the shackles only when an enlightened leader emerges. This is playing out right now in North Korea, in parts of the Mideast, until recently in Burma, which is now called Myanmar. And here's an amazingly courageous lady, Aung San Suu Kyi. Her father had rightfully won the elections to be president of the country, and he was assassinated. She won the elections. She was put under house arrest for more than 14 years. There were orders to shoot her if she left the compound. And not long ago, she stepped forward. She told her followers, stay behind. If they want to shoot, let me give them a single target. She walked in front, separated two soldiers with loaded rifles, and said, I'm going for a walk. And the leader of that small group turned to the rest of the soldiers and said, don't shoot. She's written a wonderful book. It's called Freedom from Fear. Freedom from Fear. And in it she writes, it is not power that corrupts, but fear of losing power corrupts those who wield it. And fear of the scourge of power corrupts those who are subject to it. So if you think of all the tyrants in ancient history and modern times, they all rule on the basis of fear. She got the Nobel Peace Prize, married to a Britisher, and the Burmese junta gave her permission to leave, to go to Norway, to go to Oslo. She knew very well if she went, she'd never be allowed to come back to her country. So she didn't go, but about 2 years ago she was released, and they did a special ceremony in Oslo to give her in person the Nobel Peace Prize. In the citation, the committee said, she became the leader of a democratic opposition which employs non-violent means to resist a regime characterized by brutality. Aung San Suu Kyi's struggle is one of the most extraordinary examples of civil courage in Asia in recent decades. So a few years ago, she was released on a Sunday in November, and massive crowds gathered all over Burma and Rangoon and other cities. They were happy, they were overjoyed. But for Aung San Suu Kyi, one who has made extraordinary personal sacrifices for her country, she said, my work remains unfinished. I am not free till the people are free. So she's a member of parliament now. Things are turning around in Myanmar, and it's very likely that in the next decade or so she'll become the president of that country. An amazingly courageous individual. The D in the leadership mnemonic is that we need to dare to dream big. And one of the things I revisit every 3 or 4 months, just go to Google and YouTube, is Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech, I Have a Dream. It's an amazing speech. He went off script in the latter half of the speech. He has a wonderful cadence and a rhythm, and the language he used absolutely inspires you. But I'm going to tell you a different story. And this is also a story of a school in Texas where the teacher gives these 16-year-old students, says, write an essay on what you want to be when you grow up. One of the students, his father had moved from stable to stable. He writes a 7-page essay on how he wants to own a 200-acre horse farm. He's got sketches about the stables, talks about the nutrition, pony rides, different horses, and with great anticipation submits it to the teacher. Only for the teacher 2 days later to call him and say, I'm giving you a grade of F. This is a totally unrealistic dream. No one in our small town has ever achieved anything like this. But you're a bright kid. If you want to, you can write another essay, and I'll be happy to grade it. So he goes home, thinks about it for a couple of days, and then he returns with his essay to the teacher, and he says, you can keep the F. I will keep my dream. And the true story is that 21 years later, he has 172 acre horse farm. And the teacher writes to him and he says, can I bring the kids for a picnic to your farm? And he says, absolutely, you're most welcome. And when they arrive, the teacher now turns to this young man, he's about 40 years of age, and in front of the students he says, I want to apologize. I was a dream stealer. I shall never do it again. The poet Robert Browning once said, but a man's reach should exceed his grasp, or what's a heaven for? And Søren Kierkegaard, great Danish philosopher and theologian, once said, to dare is to lose one's footing momentarily. Not to dare is to lose oneself. So great leaders dare to dream big. They have a compelling vision. They don't think of the obstacles that will necessarily occur in the path to achieving that dream. You're all going to launch into your wonderful careers. I would urge you to dare to dream big. Write down your goals, think about your goals, reflect on them on a periodic basis, and don't sell yourself short. You know, it's all within your power to achieve anything that's good for you. What is your passion? What is your purpose in life? What fires you up? If you do that, it doesn't feel like work. You know, is your work a job? Is it a career? Or is it a calling? And if you're really fortunate, it's going to be a calling. You would do it even without the money. Of course, many of us are not in a position to do that, and it's only later when we've achieved and perhaps settled down that one can choose one's calling. Lao Tzu once said, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. So I've been asked very often, Sanjiv, who comes to your mind when the word great leader, leadership moment is used? And for me, it is unmistakably Mahatma Gandhi. So Maha means great, Atma means soul, great soul. This term was coined by Rabindranath Tagore. Tagore was a poet. In 1912, he wrote a series of poems called Gitanjali in Bengali, his native language. Next year, he translated it himself into English, and he got the Nobel Prize in Literature. Gandhi spent 20 years in South Africa before coming to India, fighting for the rights of the downtrodden. And Tagore said, Mahatma, he's a great soul. In 1930, salt was plentiful in India, and yet the British had imposed this exorbitant tax on salt. So Gandhi writes to the Viceroy. He says, I consider the salt tax to be the most iniquitous, the most abhorrent, the most repugnant of all the laws that you have imposed. And since India's freedom movement should first begin for the poor, I'm going to conduct the salt march. I'm going to walk 220 miles. So the British miscalculate. Gandhi is 62, he's frail. They say, you know what, he's never going to be able to do it, this is going to backfire. And they give him permission. Gandhi then assembles 77 followers. He has Hindus, Muslims, Christians, untouchables, the lowest caste, terrible caste system in India. The youngest is 16. Gandhi at 62 is the oldest. And as they start to march from one village to another village, throngs of people join them. 27 days later, he arrives in a coastal village. There's the sea. He dips his hand into the water. He lifts it. There's salt. And by many accounts, he declares, henceforth, we're not going to pay tax to the British on salt. That image captivated the imagination of millions of people in India. But not only in India, British parliamentarians, factory workers, political leaders in America, but it launched India's freedom movement. Over the next 6 months, there were 5,000 salt marches. 100,000 Indians were arrested, beaten, jailed, and many died. But it was a historic moment and a great leadership moment. Gandhi once said, there are 7 sins. And to me, this summarizes leadership. He said, wealth without work, pleasure without conscience, knowledge without character, commerce without morality, science without humanity, worship without sacrifice, and politics without principle. So all great leaders have a work ethic. They have a clear conscience. They have character, morality. They serve humanity. They make enormous personal, family sacrifices. They always adhere to their core values and their core principles. Einstein said of Gandhi, generations to come, it may be, will scarce believe that such a one as this ever in flesh and blood walked upon this earth. And if you talk to Aung Suu Kyi, if you talk to the late Martin Luther King Jr., Nelson Mandela, the young people in the Arab Spring in Tunisia and Egypt, and say, who has been a driving force? Who has been one of the greatest leaders? Who's been your inspiration? Invariably, it is Gandhi, an amazing individual. Now, the E in the leadership mnemonic is that great leaders are effective. We need both managers and leaders. You can be a great manager, not a good leader. Right? You can be a great leader, not a good manager. Peter Drucker, management guru, once said, efficiency is doing things right. Effectiveness is doing the right things. The same could be said about the difference between managers and leaders. Managers do things right. Leaders do the right things. I had the opportunity to meet Deepak Jain. He's a legendary dean, the dean of the Kellogg School of Management, one of the top 5 MBA programs in the world. He's now moved to Paris, is the dean of INSEAD, actually at a leadership course. And I said, Deepak, define for me your difference between managers and leaders. He said, Sanjiv, it's very simple. Managers are for today, leaders are for tomorrow. Right? They have a compelling vision of the future. They articulate it, they walk the path, they inspire the followers to come on board. Now, when I think of effective oratory, I'm reminded of Sir Winston Churchill. Somebody mentioned Churchill as a great leader. It is said that for a 1-minute speech, he prepared for 45 minutes. For a 45-minute speech, he prepared for 15 hours. No speech writers back then. Major General Omar Bradley is reputed to have once said, one speech of Sir Winston Churchill has more might than an entire battalion. And John F. Kennedy, in 1963, bestowed upon Sir Winston Churchill honorary U.S. citizenship. And when he did it, he said, Sir Winston Churchill took the English language, mobilized it into battle. And here's an example of his oratory. He said, we are resolved to destroy Hitler and every vestige of the Nazi regime. From this, nothing will turn us. We will never parley. We shall never negotiate with Hitler or his gang. We shall fight him by land, by air, by sea, until, with God's help, we had rid the earth of his shadow and liberate its people from his yoke. But this begs the question, was Hitler a great leader? And to my consternation, at the end of the last century, Time magazine had devoted the entire issue on leadership. And Gandhi and Einstein were the two greatest leaders. But a lot of people nominated Hitler, including one of our governors from one of our states. But in that same issue of Time magazine, there was a wonderful article by Elie Wiesel. Elie Wiesel is a Nobel laureate, he's a Holocaust survivor, he's a professor right here at Boston University. And in it he wrote, he said, the fact is that Hitler was beloved not by the military in the beginning, but by his people, the average Germans who pledged to him an affection, a tenderness, and a fidelity that bordered on the irrational. His kingdom collapsed after 12 years in a war that remains one of the most atrocious, brutal, and deadliest in history, but which, by the same token, allowed several large and legendary figures to emerge. Eisenhower, de Gaulle, Montgomery, Zhukov, Patton. But when later we evoke the 20th century, amongst the first names that will surge to mind will be that of a fanatic with a mustache who thought to reign by selling the soul of his people to the 1,000 demons of hate and of death. Right? Remember what Aung Suu Kyi said. She said, it is not power that corrupts, but fear of losing power corrupts those who wield it. And fear of the scourge of power corrupts those who are subject to it. So I think in your book, in my book, he was not a great leader. He was a fiery orator. He had a number of followers, but he got them to do it on the basis of fear, on the basis of total fear. This is Sir Winston Churchill, May 8th, 1945, Victory in Europe Day. So he's standing on a balcony and a throng of people collect below and he gives a very short impromptu speech. He says, this is your victory. In all our long history, we have never seen a greater day than this. Everyone tried. Neither the long years, nor the dangers, nor the fierce attacks of the enemy have in any way weakened the independent resolve of the British nation. No sooner had he said the first sentence, this is your victory, that the crowd below erupted and shouted back, no, it is yours. This was the perfect leadership moment. The moment at which the leader and the followers are united in purpose and values. Here's an amazing and visionary leader from a very poor, destitute country of Bangladesh. They get their share, more than their share of cholera, of typhoons, of cyclones, earthquakes. And 30 years ago, he's traveling through a very poor village in a jeep with a colleague, and he comes across this lady by the name of Sufia Begum. She made bamboo stools and earned 2 cents a day. 2 cents a day. He says, I was shocked. In my university courses in Dhaka, I theorized about sums in the millions of dollars. But here before my eyes, the problems of life and death were posed in terms of pennies. He then came across 41 other women. And 42 of them, including Sufia Begum, in aggregate owned the moneylenders $27. 42 women owning the moneylenders $27. They're making 2 cents a day. The moneylenders are charging them 200% interest every 2 weeks. They'd never be able to repay that small loan. So he goes to the bankers and he says, why don't you loan to these poor people a little bit of money at a reasonable rate? He says the bankers almost fell over. So he started his own bank. It's called the Grameen Bank. In the last 30 years, they've given away $9 billion in loans. Majority, 99% are women. He has greater than 99.5% return rate. These women are now empowered. Some of them in a fishing village, they catch the fish. They have a cell phone. They click on it. There's a picture of the central market in Dhaka, and they negotiate the price of the catch. They're sending their kids to school. They're paying off their rickshaws. So this is the concept of microloans. It's now being duplicated in 60 countries, including ours. So amazing visionary leader. He got the Nobel Peace Prize, and in the citation it said, Muhammad Yunus has shown himself to be a leader who has managed to translate visions into practical action for the benefit of millions of people, not only in Bangladesh, but also in many other countries. King Solomon the Wise once said, where there is no vision, the people perish. We need amazingly visionary leaders, not only everywhere in the world, but especially in these very poor and destitute countries where there's this cycle of poverty. They're mired in poverty. There's a cycle, a way of corruption that is very hard to weed out. So great leaders reflect on key events in their life or a single transformative or magical moment. Very often that moment is jolting. It's negative. But the person experiencing it says to himself or herself, you know what? I'm going to make a difference here. I'm going to make a difference here. They get this burning desire, develop a laser-like focus, have a vision, and then make it a reality. The Buddha once said, every life has a measure of sorrow. Sometimes it is this that awakens us. Now here's an incredible individual that I've had the fortune to meet. I actually met him at a leadership course. and we've become sort of friends. He's a national hero in his native country, Colombia, and hence the term Papa Jaime. His name is Jaime Aramello. He's about 64 years of age. About 36 years ago, when he was age 28, he's standing on a street corner in Bogota, and he's looking at these kids, orphans, who grew up in the sewer, feeling sorry for their plight. There's a 7-year-old beautiful girl smiling at him. As they're having this interchange, a car comes around the corner, it stops, a window rolls down, and somebody tosses a toy. It's a yellow school bus, Fisher-Price toy. The car recedes. The 7-year-old girl comes running up to the middle of the street, picks up the toy, she's beaming with joy, looking at Jaime Aramello, and as they're having this encounter, a truck comes from around the corner and smashes her into oblivion. And he says to himself, you know what? This is my calling in life. I'm going to rescue these kids. I'm going to adopt these kids. In the last 36 years, he has adopted, housed, schooled, fed 35,000 orphans. So he's a national hero, hence the name Papa Jaime. So I said to him, how do you pay for all of this? He says, Sanjiv, I have a bakery. The only thing we make is cookies. And I've convinced all the restaurants in Bogota, Medellin, next to the cash register, keep my cookies, next to it a shoebox, people grab a cookie, and they drop some change, $1, 50 cents. If they don't have it, next time they come, they drop extra. I get 50% of my needs that way. So I turned to him and I said, what about the other 50%? He said, I'm a motivational speaker. I speak all over Latin America, and I plow all my honorarium into the foundation. So I said, listen, I know what motivational speakers get. That doesn't cut it. He said, you're right. It comes. I said, excuse me, Papa, I don't understand what you're saying. He said, okay, I'll tell you a story. 2 months ago, I needed 41,000 US dollars to pay my bills. So I go to a bank, second bank, third bank, they turn me down. They said, Papa Jaime, we love the work you do. You already got loans with us at a very good rate. We can't give you more. So he's coming back to his office, and there's a street woman across the street. And she recognizes him, crosses over, gives him a hug, and he turns to her and he says, are you hungry? She said, yeah. He says, come to the office. I can give you cookies and coffee. So she's there in the office, having cookies and drinking coffee. He's on the phone, talking to 3 other bankers, and he's being turned down. And she turns to him and he says, how much money do you need? He said, I need 41,000 US dollars. She says, I'll give it to you. He said, Sanjiv, I said to myself, she's cuckoo. But she opened her purse, she had $60,000. Her son had sent her the money to get off the street and buy a home. She says to him, I've saved some other money as well. I'm okay on the street for now. I can move. You need it. Your children need it. Take it. No questions asked. You can return it if you want, when you want. It's an amazing guy. He says, this kind of thing happens to me all the time. A couple of years ago, he's into skydiving. And he suddenly sees wires that are not supposed to be there. He swerves, smashes into a tree. I get wind of it. He's admitted to the neurosurgical ICU in Bogota. He's got CSF rhinorrhea. I get his CAT scans, MRIs. We review them here. And I finally connect with him. I said, Papa, how are you doing? He says, Sanjiv, I'm in great shape. You know, I've lost my sense of smell, but all my other senses are so pure and brighter. And I said, are you on steroids? He says, no, I'm not on steroids. I said, you almost died. You sound so happy. He says, I couldn't die. I have to be for my children. That's the way he lives his life. So he's now, things were so bad, if one of these kids was begging outside a fancy restaurant, they would call the police. It was not the police, it was a death squad. They would take them back to the gutter and shoot them or torch them. He showed me the photograph of a young lady, 3rd-degree burns, entire left side of her body. He rescued her, 17 reconstructive surgeries. She then came on a scholarship, computer sciences to America, is back home, is married, has a kid. He says, Sanjiv, that's my grandchild. That child plays with my biological grandchildren. But he also showed me the photograph of a young man dressed in impeccable white with a tennis racket, junior national champion of tennis in Colombia, flanked by Pete Sampras on one side and Agassi on the other. These kids have grown up to become computer scientists, professional athletes, teachers, doctors, surgeons, and many are giving back to his organization. So he found his purpose in life with that one jolting moment when he saw this beautiful 7-year-old girl get killed. Jim Collins once said, the good to great leaders never wanted to become larger than life heroes. They never aspired to be put on a pedestal and become these unreachable icons. They were seemingly ordinary people, quietly producing extraordinary results. And Margaret Mead, a great anthropologist, once said, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. So great leaders possess a sense of purpose, and young people can lead in extraordinary ways. Montaigne, the French philosopher, once said, the great and glorious masterpiece of man is to live with purpose. Mark Twain once said, the two most important days of your life are the day you're born and the day you find out why. It's a very interesting exercise. Sometimes when you're settled in your new jobs, careers, reflect on your purpose in life and write it down. And then everything you do has to be aligned to that purpose. Otherwise it's a distraction or a detour. And you will see so much happiness and fulfillment in your life when you live your purpose. This is an amazing young lady, a great leader. She was a 19-year-old pre-med student at Yale, does an ophthalmology elective. Saddened to see people who've grown blind from preventable, treatable causes of blindness. Who are these people? Poor people, right? Never got to see a doctor, eye doctor till it was too late. So with 29 other students, she goes back and starts an organization called Unite for Sight. And in the last 6 years, they have done 52,000 sight-restoring surgeries. They have seen 1.3 million patients. They have trained 4,000 fellows. She has 6,000 volunteers, including nursing students, medical students, web designers, and professors of ophthalmology. She got admission to Stanford, and she said, I need to defer it for a couple of years. I need to work 80 hours a week on my organization. And the dean of admissions at Stanford said, Jennifer, take your time. When you're ready, we'll be ready for you. Amazing young lady. Joseph Campbell once said, follow your bliss and doors will open where there were no doors before. So the Jennifer Staples of the world, the Papa Jaimes of the world are following their bliss. The H in the leadership mnemonic is that great leaders have humility. Sir Edmund Hillary, first person in the world to climb the tallest mountain in the world, right? Mount Everest. He was from New Zealand, the son of a beekeeper, very humble guy. So he climbs Mount Everest and he comes down with his Sherpa, Tenzing Norgay, and he turns to the other Sherpas and says, what can I do for you? And they said, please build schools and clinics for the poor people of Nepal. He devoted most of his life to doing that. He created something called the Himalayan Trust, the Everest Foundation, and he did that. He was asked, what was the crowning achievement of your life? Being the first person to climb Mount Everest? He said, no. All I did was leave a footprint on a mountain. The greatest achievement I've had is the building of schools and clinics for the poor people of Nepal. And talking about humility, he said, I was just an average bloke. It was the media that transformed me into this heroic figure. But as I learned through the years, as long as you don't believe all that rubbish about yourself, you wouldn't come to much harm. I've enjoyed great satisfaction from my climb of Everest, but my most worthwhile things have been the buildings of schools and clinics for the people of Nepal. That has given me more satisfaction than a footprint on a mountain. He also once said, it is not the mountain that we conquer, but ourselves. Right? Back to the theme of courage. Rightly esteemed the first of human qualities. Look at these two great philanthropists, Warren Buffett and Bill Gates. And this is a wonderful show on TV called GPS by Fareed Zakaria. This was the inaugural show. He has Mr. Bill Gates as his guest, and he turns to him at the end of the 1-hour interview and he says, Mr. Gates, final question. Do you think history will remember you as the man who created Microsoft or the person behind the Gates Foundation? And Bill Gates answers, you know, who knows how history will think of me? You know, the person who played bridge with Warren Buffett? Maybe, or maybe not at all. And look at Warren Buffett. He said to Bill and Melinda Gates, you guys have figured it out, how to really donate money and do good in the world. There's no way I can even come close. So here's $32 billion for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. But I have one stipulation. You have to spend $3 billion a year, otherwise I take it back. And they're wonderful friends. And Bill Gates said, amazing. He's entrusted us. What an enormous responsibility for me and Melinda to spend this money wisely. You know, one of the most powerful words in the English language, trustworthy. If I say Adam is trustworthy, it's one of the greatest compliments I can pay him. You know, there's praiseworthy, but it's not as much as trustworthy. Great leaders possess a sense of humor. Benjamin Disraeli and William Gladstone were successive prime ministers, but arch rivals. They hated each other. So there's a quote attributable to Benjamin Disraeli in the press, and the next day, a woman reporter is interviewing him, and she says, Prime Minister Disraeli, what's the difference between misfortune and calamity? And without skipping a beat, he says, well, if Gladstone were to fall into the Thames, that would be a misfortune. But if someone were to drag him out, that would be a national calamity. There's the story of Ronald Reagan, who when he was shot in 1981, and he's got a hemothorax, and they're wheeling him into the operating room, and the chief of thoracic surgery was this tall 6'7" figure. So he's surrounded by the trauma team, blood bank, cardiologist, pulmonologist. He's being wheeled in, and he says, stop, I have a very important question to ask. I said, yes, President Reagan. He says, I hope all of you are Republicans. At which point the leader of the team said, President Reagan, today we are all Republicans. It's a great answer. And Gandhi, after a brutal beating of many thousands of Indians and some deaths, asked by a Western reporter, Gandhi ji, what do you think of Western civilization? And Gandhi answered, I think it would be a good idea. So great leaders have great sense of humor. They have great integrity. Heraclitus, the great Greek poet, philosopher, once said, the soul is dyed the color of its thoughts. Think only those things that are in line with your principles and can bear the full light of day. The content of your character is your choice. Day by day, what you choose, what you think, and what you do is who you become. Your integrity is your destiny. Right? You can do something amazingly well for 30 years with great integrity. As an individual, as a GI practice, as a hospital, as a family, and then you compromise your integrity. It will sully and tarnish your reputation for life. We have seen so much corporate greed in the last 20, 30 years, from bankers in Singapore to the Enron scandal to every single week there's a story about it. Right? These people have not found their purpose in life. They're not happy. There's too much avarice, and it will simply destroy their integrity. And finally, the P in the leadership mnemonic is that great leaders pack other people's parachute. So this is Captain Charlie Plum, and I've had the fortune of having him give a keynote at a week-long update in internal medicine that I do every year. And he's also come to listen to one of my leadership talks in Anaheim. And his story is that some 30 years ago, he's sitting at a diner having breakfast with his wife. And there's a guy sitting 2 rows away, and he keeps glaring at him. After a while, he walks over. He says, you Captain Charlie Plum? Captain Plum looks up and says, sure am, sir. He says, you flew F-4 Phantom jets off the Kitty Hawk during the Vietnam War. He says, that's true. The guy says, your plane was shot, you ejected, you were captured, you were a prisoner of war for 6 years, and you were tortured. So Captain Plum looks up. He says, that's all true. Who are you? And the guy says, I packed your parachute. So Captain Plum gets up. He says, oh my God, I've been meaning to look for you. Thank you. You saved my life. Captain Plum was 24 years of age. He'd been married to his high school sweetheart at the Annapolis Naval Academy. And off he goes to Vietnam. He has done 75 successful sorties. It's the last one. 4 days later, he's going to come home. He's shot, captured. He's being tortured. He's in an 8-foot cell. He's depressed. This is not my war. This is my president's war. I was going to go home to my bride. One day, he thinks he hears a cricket chirping in the corner of the cell. So he goes to investigate. It's not a cricket. It's a piece of wire scratching the concrete floor through a hole in the wall. So he pulls on the wire. There's a tug. It disappears. 2 hours later, it reappears with a piece of toilet paper on it. I'm a fellow prisoner of war. Memorize this code and swallow the toilet paper. He said it was easier to memorize the code. And the guy connected with him and said, don't feel sorry for yourself. It's a fatal disease. It's called victimitis. You and I will survive. There were 190 elite US fighter jet pilots in this prisoner of war camp. And they would connect with these pieces of wire. Once in a while, they'd be allowed to eat together. And occasionally, when they went to the latrine to dump their stuff, they would be able to talk to each other. There's one other guy, a midshipman, 19 years of age, and he fell off an aircraft carrier. And as he would say later, I was rescued, not captured. So they're making fun of him. They're all exchanging notes as to what altitude they were flying at and at what speed. And they turn to him and say, so how many knots were you going at? How many feet above sea level? 2 years later, the Vietnamese say to this young midshipman who's 21 years of age now, we're going to release you. You're the only one who didn't drop bombs on us. He's very naive. He says, you know what? I'm part of the team. If you want to release me, you have to release everyone. They scoff at him. And the guy who connected with Captain Charlie Plum says to him, I'm the senior most guy in this camp. I'm in charge. Take my marching orders and go home. And here's the most amazing part of the story. It's absolutely incredible. In those 2 years, he has memorized the names of the first of kin, the telephone numbers, and the addresses of the other 190 fellow prisoners of war, playing songs in his head. 190 people, first of kin, telephone numbers, addresses. And on his own accord, he crisscrosses the country, goes to their homes, says, your husband is alive. Your father is alive. He was the ultimate parachute packer. So parachute packing is a metaphor for mentoring and nurturing. Each one of you is here today because somebody packed your parachute. And it's our job to A, recognize them. Call them up, send them a letter, go visit them. Don't wait for the eulogy. It's my plea to you. And it's your job now as leaders to pack other people's parachutes. So I said to Captain Plum, who's now 76 years of age, I said, what happened to your group? He said, Sanjiv, you know, I give 75 talks a year throughout the country. I do workshops. Some of us became generals, admirals. One of us almost became the President of America. Senator McCain was in the same camp. So I said, no, I'm not interested about those people. What happened to this midshipman? He said, Sanjiv, he became a teacher. And to this day, he can recall the other 190 names, telephone numbers, addresses, first of kin. But if you interrupt him, he has to start all over again. Right? What an amazing story. Captain Charlie Plum. So in an ancient scripture it says, he who gives liberally goes straight to the gods. On the high ridge of heaven, he stands exalted. We're going to finish in 2 minutes. Bill George used to be the CEO of Medtronics. He joined for 10 years. He said, when he joined, he said, I will do 10 years. You can fire me if I'm not doing a good job. He now teaches leadership at Harvard Business School. We've met and talked many times, and he's written 2 wonderful books, True North and Authentic Leadership. And in True North, he says, just as a compass points towards a magnetic pole, your true north will pull you towards the purpose of your leadership. When you follow that internal compass, your leadership will be authentic. Others may influence or guide you. But your truth is derived from your life story, and only you can determine what it should be. So leadership is a marathon journey, not a sprint. Along the way, there can be many a heartbreak hill. It's been said that it's difficult to define leadership. I disagree. Here's my definition. Leadership is the ability to articulate a vision and walk the path such that it inspires people to rise above the banality and strife of their common day existence and achieve a higher and common goal. So here's what we've talked about, the 10 tenets of leadership. Great leaders listen with heart and soul. They have empathy and compassion. They have an attitude that's upbeat and courageous. They dare to dream big. They're effective. They're resilient. They have a sense of purpose. They have humility and humor. They have integrity. They also have great ideas. Eleanor Roosevelt, one of my favorites, once said, small minds discuss people. Average minds discuss events. Great minds discuss ideas. There's a wonderful book by Jim Rohn. He says, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Choose your friends wisely. Choose your colleagues. Choose the academic center, the practice that you're going into. And spend time with the people who discuss ideas, who rejuvenate, who light up your spirit. And imagination is very important. Einstein once said, imagination is more important than knowledge. Knowledge is limited. Imagination encircles the world. And then pack other people's parachutes and adhere to your core principles. We've not talked about many other inspirational leaders. Many of you mentioned Kennedy, Martin Luther King Jr. What about Nelson Mandela? Maybe even our current Pope. Pope for the poor people. Pope for the people. Look at Nelson Mandela. 27 years in prison. It's hard to fathom 27 hours or days. 27 years. And when he's released, he's asked the question, Mr. Mandela, do you harbor resentment or bitterness against your captors? He gave the most beautiful answer. He said, I have no bitterness, I have no resentment. Resentment is like drinking poison and then hoping it will kill your enemies. Right? It'll only bog you down. Remember, it is always possible to lead. You can lead at many different levels. Soren Kierkegaard once said, if I were to wish for anything, I should not wish for wealth and power, but for the passionate sense of the potential. For the eye, whichever young and ardent, sees the possible. Pleasure disappoints, possibility never. And what wine is so sparkling, what's so fragrant, what's so intoxicating as possibility? You can all assume leadership positions, academic, clinical practice, try to serve on the education committee, anything that resonates for you, that's aligned with your purpose in life. All of you have already led, and many of you with distinction. I invite you to take a moment and reflect on it. Then go tell your story. Each one of you has the spark of leadership. Keep it ignited. Thank you very much.